Good morning, everyone. This is the People Matter Show. Your host is Miguel Narvaez, and I have a very, very special guest today. Is not only a leader among the mortgage and the real estate industry, but also I would say is a mentor for many, many professionals, including myself. He is the co-founder of NAHREP, which is one of the largest organizations, real estate organizations in the country. He also created the Hispanic Wealth Project, a nonprofit organization with a strategic plan to triple Hispanic household wealth by 2024. Co-founder and partner of Latitude is an event platform with Sol Trujillo. I believe this year was the last year. They changing the name now. We'll talk about it in a minute. In 2012, he was appointed to the advisory board of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who he serves as of 2014 as a chairman of the Mortgage Committee. He was also an advisory board member of the CFPB. He worked with Freddie Mac, Fannie, and JP Morgan Chase in different programs. He was in 2013 a recipient of the Mortgage Bankers Association Investing in Community Award, named by the Realtor magazine as one of the most influential people in real estate, CEO for mortgage companies for 14 years back in the 2000s. Also has interviewed almost every U.S. president in the last 15 years, including Bush, Clinton, Obama. I don't know if you interview also uh, Trump, but we'll find out in a minute. This is our good friend Gary Acosta. Good morning, Gary.
Miguel, thank you. Nice to see you, buddy.
Nice to see you. So, did you interview Trump as well, or no?
No, I have not interviewed President-elect Trump yet.
All right. So, I'm sure that is in your agenda in the future years. So let's start talking about Gary Acosta. I mean, a lot of people knows about Gary in the professional aspect, but let's talk about you. Who was Gary as a child? How was Gary? Who was that kid? How do you describe him?
I was a nerdy kid when I was very young. And then when I got to high school, I started to play basketball, which allowed me to hang out with the cool kids a little bit more. But yeah, I was a very kind of studious, nerdy kid when I was growing up. And I had great parents. I was very lucky in that regard. My parents were very supportive, always encouraged me to kind of reach for the stars, convinced me that I could do something consequential with my life. So I had a great childhood. I had great parents. I had great grandparents. I was very, very lucky.
I know that you've always been very passionate about the Hispanics and the community. How did you get that? I mean, not being Hispanic means that you're going to be passionate about Hispanics, but you are not only Hispanic, but you are a true example about someone that is not just a leader, but passionate about the community. How is it that you got that background or got to
Well,
be so
that's
passionate?
a great question because I don't necessarily consider myself sort of a nonprofit civil rights kind of person, even though I respect all those, all those things. I consider myself more as a serial entrepreneur. And so when I started working in the mortgage business back in the kind of early 90s, being Latino, I did a lot of business with Latino home buyers. And I saw a need. Basically, I wrote a blog a few months ago called "A Foundation, a Passion Project, and a Moonshot." And I've always felt that people need all three of those. And what that means exactly is you need a foundation, which is what supports you and what pays your bills and what basically provides for your family. You need a passion project. I think people need purpose. And sometimes that's your job, but sometimes it's not. It could be basically a nonprofit sort of initiative that you do or some blog that you write that has a very specific objective. And then a moonshot, which is like, this is my big dream. This is my big aspiration. And so sometimes you can combine all those things into one. Sometimes those are three separate things. And so for me, NAHREP began as a passion project, which was separate from my business, which was a mortgage company. Over time, I sort of combined those things. And basically, I have my passion project, I have my moonshot, and I have my foundation all in one. But it sort of happened organically over time.
It's awesome. And what would you say throughout these years? Obviously, you were in the mortgage business, in the real estate business. Is there something on the way that you decided, you know what, I'm just going to stick to a nonprofit and to help the community, and to help the professionals and not go back into the private sector?
Well, so I was in the mortgage business when the big crash happened in 2008. I sort of pivoted at that point, and I partnered with a couple of friends to start an asset management business because the business was basically driven by bank-owned assets between 2008 and 2012. We started NAHREP back in 2000, so NAHREP was already around at that point. When the market started to stabilize in 2012, I started to contemplate, okay, what do I do? Do I get back into the mortgage business? What would be the right move at this point? But one thing sort of stood out that surprised me a little bit, which that between 2008 and 2012, NAREP actually grew. I would have expected it to actually contract and get smaller. It actually got bigger. And I think it was because during that time, which was very challenging for the industry, people needed each other more than ever. And so people and platforms like NAREP were even more essential for people's survival. So in 2012, I said, you know what? NAREP could end up being something pretty fun. It may not just be a real estate trade association. I can kind of see it evolving into this larger economic mobility, wealth building platform. So I think I'm going to try to just spend my primary time, focused on that for 5 years. That was the goal. I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on NAREP for 5 years, really see what we can do with this organization, and then I'll sort of figure out what to do at that point. 5 years became 10 years. The organization continued to grow. It became more interesting. We did the latitude thing that opened up some different doors. So all of it is just kind of in a process. Miguel, I got a chance to be the commencement speaker at the UC Irvine School of Business a couple of years ago. And one of the things I said to them from the very beginning, because these are obviously very good students, very accomplished young people who have very clear visions for what they want to do with their life. And I said, no matter what those visions are, you can be certain that your life is going to turn out very different than what you're thinking right now. And that's
Right.
just the way things tend to be. And that should be an exciting thing for you to a certain degree. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it makes sense. Not every time it just goes the way that it's planned. Now, we know that throughout all of these years, you've been a mentor and a leader for many professionals. You've been influencing in the lives of a lot of people. What would you say to all of these young professionals? Could be in real estate, mortgage, I mean, title, it doesn't matter. But what would you say, based on what you've seen are the biggest mistakes people do? What kind of advice would you give them of the things that you've seen over and over among professionals to avoid?
Well, to avoid, now, first of all, I would say something that maybe isn't that popular, which is there's no shortcuts and there's no get rich quick schemes. Sure, some people win the lottery, and those are the stories that we hear about. And when I say win the lottery, I don't mean literally win the lottery. I mean they do a business or they pursue a particular initiative that ends up being really big really quickly. Those are the outliers. Those aren't what typically happens. So, number one, there's no replacing work ethic. You have to work and you have to be really good at something. One of the things that we hear a lot is that we are the average of the five people that we spend the most time with, right? And I think that's absolutely true. So surround yourself with good people. I support that. But nobody really talks about that, like what's the next sort of layer below that, which is in order to hang out with successful people who have a lot going on, you kind of have to bring something to the table, right? If it were that easy, you just say, okay, I'm going to hang out with Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and, five billionaires, and then I'll be a billionaire, right? So those guys aren't going to hang out with you unless you have something that is valuable to them, that makes you an interesting person to bring into that circle. So I tell people, focus on what you want to be good at. It should be something that kind of comes naturally to you, something that you really like doing. And it doesn't really matter what that is. If you're known for being the best at something, it's going to open a number of doors for you. So to answer your question, basically, there's no shortcuts and there's no replacing real skill, right? Be great at something and that'll open doors for you. And it'll take you places that you can't even envision right now.
Awesome. No shortcuts. I know how passionate you are about Hispanics, and actually, you were invited recently last week at the United Nations to talk about a very sensitive topic, which is the Hispanics being united, and especially with fundamental topics. Can you expand more about the topic that you were invited to talk at the United Nations? And can you also elaborate why is it that Hispanics normally are divided on most of the fundamental topics?
So I'll kind of paraphrase what I was invited to speak about. So first of all, it was the Hispanic Leadership Summit, and it's an annual event hosted at the United Nations, and they invite like 600 Latino leaders from different organizations and different sectors to talk about a variety of topics. And I was given the opportunity to either speak about housing from a data standpoint or to speak about unity. And I chose unity because, as I expressed during my comments, I'm not sure that there's anything more important than that subject that people in our position, Hispanic leaders, should be talking about right now. I started off that presentation with an interesting anecdote. Ronald Reagan in 1966 made a statement that became known as the 11th commandment of Republican politics. He said, "Thou shalt not speak ill of thy fellow Republicans." Right. So that was a very powerful statement of unity that I think has served the Republican Party well over the last several decades. So I used that basically as a starting point to start a conversation about why that was important, how it affects our unity, our brand. I talked about what I call the Latino brand, affects everything from our access to capital to our career paths to what our kids think of themselves and what people think of them when they go to school every day. And so it's a very impassioned plea that I was making to the Hispanic community. But one of the things that I think was important to explain in that presentation is what unity is and what it is not. So unity does not mean uniformity. It doesn't mean we're all the same. It doesn't mean we all vote the same. It doesn't mean we all think the same. It just basically means that we share certain values, that we support each other fundamentally, that we have each other's back when necessary, and that we respect something called the Latino brand, right? So that whether we like it or not, we're all attached to the reputation that Latinos have in this country. And we need to protect that reputation. Because when that reputation is poor, we shouldn't be surprised that we have challenges accessing capital and having opportunities being afforded to us. Conversely, when that reputation is positive, and I gave an example of the Indian community in the United States, and I mean Indians from India, they are
Right.
1% of the US population. IBM, Google, Twitter, PepsiCo, they've all had Indian CEOs. Now, is it possible that Indians are just better at running big companies and there's no Latinos capable of doing that? Or is it more likely that a narrative emerged in corporate America that said that Indian people are pretty good at running companies? That narrative has a cascading effect. So we as Latinos all have a stake in the reputation of our brand, and we have a vested interest in supporting each other, doing business with each other, that sort of thing. The Jewish community, the Indian community, those are great examples of communities that have successfully done that. And there are Jewish people that are on both ends of the spectrum politically, but there are certain things that they are perfectly aligned about. And that's where we need to get as a community.
Harry, I know this question might be a little bit polemic. A lot of people just take it in different directions, but I find through my 25 years in this country that a lot of times they don't like to see Hispanics being successful because they're not. And there is a saying among Hispanics, or there's a saying that you have a bowl of lobsters and all Hispanics, and then in the other side, another bowl of his lobsters that are, white people or African American. And you see those on the right just helping each other to get out, and you see the bowl with Hispanics just pulling each other all the time and just talking bad about each other and not helping each other. And do you believe that's something that happens among Hispanics? Did it happen before and it's changing? Where do you see that narrative in your perspective?
Well, I think academics have really sort of investigated that a little bit, right? They go back to the sort of tribal mentality that is basically in our DNA, right? So that, a lot of us have indigenous roots, and, Indian tribes were always at war with one another, right? So there's basically a theory that that is part of our DNA a little bit. I'm not sure that that's true or not. There may be some truth to that. I think that what you're saying has historically been the case. I think that there is a scarcity mentality that tends to exist within the Latino community. And it's not just the Latino community, which basically means that your success means that there's less out there for me. So why would I root for that? So it's not an abundance mentality where we think that, our job is to expand the pie, not to fight over the crumbs, essentially. I think that's a mindset that younger people within the Latino community, I think, are starting to acquire a little bit more. So it's a bit of a generational thing that I think when people start to be exposed to different cultures and different communities and become a little bit more educated, then they become less, I think, likely to have that mindset, that scarcity mindset, and more likely to recognize that we actually are stronger if we support each other. It's a process, it's an educational process. So, to answer your question, I'm not sure exactly what the roots are of that. I agree historically that that has been the case, but I see evidence that that is changing.
Thank you. Gary, throughout the years, you have managed in different businesses and thousands of people that you have overseen. And this show is about people. It's about leaders like yourself that have mentor or manage and be able to empower other people to grow as well. What's have been some of those tough decisions as leader, as CEO that you have ever made in regards to someone and especially people that you manage? Any experience or any type of reference in regards to tough decisions that you have made on your life regarding other people that you manage?
So, I would say that one of the toughest decisions that I've had to make in the current position that I have was back in 2012. So one of the sayings that I love is that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. Like when we have a crisis, it presents an opportunity for us to reevaluate, to reinvent ourselves if necessary, and to make large wholesale changes in our strategies, right? So NAHREP was about 10 years old when the crash happened, and it gave us a chance to ask ourselves, if we knew 10 years ago what we know now, what would we have done differently? And there was a handful of things. We changed our governance structure. We changed a couple of different things in terms of process. But the biggest thing was we changed our relationship with our chapters. And we transitioned our chapters from being independent entities that had a affiliated relationship with the national organization to actually branches of the national organization. And I say that was a very tough decision because it wasn't necessarily popular. And I remember the board, the national board at the time, told me we could lose a lot of people by forcing this change. And I remember saying, I happened to be right, but I didn't know it at the time. I said, I don't care if we go down to 500 members. If they're the right 500 people, we will conquer the world. And so I think that's the lesson, right? Which is you can't be afraid to purge your company or your organization of people who just don't buy into the culture and don't buy into the leadership or the goals of the organization, no matter how productive they are. And I think in the mortgage and real estate business, we tend to put top producers on a pedestal, right? And I think that that's fine, but if those top producers are also toxic in some ways, they are actually suppressing the success of everybody else in your organization. So the net result is not positive. So at the end of the day, I say you will attract what you reflect, right?
Mm.
So if you have certain disciplines and certain fundamentals of your organization that you will stand by to the very end, you're going to attract people who buy into that. And you're going to repel people who don't. And that's a hard thing for people to do, right? Especially in a business that's very cyclical, where you need people who are going to be productive. Productivity does not equate to, I think, positive outcomes all the time. Sometimes you need to sacrifice a little bit of productivity in exchange for culture, in exchange for people who are loyal to your organization and who are going to attract people like that. That's
Right.
the biggest lesson that I've learned, is probably the one thing that we got right with NAHREP during that important stretch during the housing crisis that has served us well over the years.
It's so important that you're talking about trust and you're talking about building, working with people that really buy into your mission, into your goals, and culture as well. I think that's so important. The fact that in every single leader that I have talked to and that I have conversation, they all relate to that topic. The fact that you want to have people that are buying into your vision as a leader.
Which also puts a little bit on you, though, Miguel. I'll just kind of finish with that, right? Which is, the best leaders also are people who have a very strong ability to articulate that vision extremely well. And I think one of the skill sets that's undervalued in business in general are strong communication skills, right? So we talk about having technical skills and how important that is. We rarely talk about how important communication is. Be able to convey an idea, to be able to sell an idea, and to be able to inspire people to buy into that idea. That you could have the best idea in the world, but if you don't know how to articulate that idea, then you're going to have challenges with that.
Well said. Well said. Gary, I know it's all, I mean, you have your own blog. You're right. I think it's weekly. And I always read your blogs and you always talk about your different topics from what's happening out there in the industries. And you always talk about, all kind of topics related in people as well. But one of the things that I want to ask you is when it comes to people, who has been that person that has impressed you the most? I mean, you have met like a few people, like I would say in the world, I would say, have met so many great leaders and presidents and influential people in throughout the U.S. Who has been the one that has impressed you the most?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, you're right. I've gotten the chance to meet presidents and people who have been very successful in their lives. I maybe didn't get to know them really well, but I got to spend a little bit of time with them. One of the most impressive people that I've gotten to know over the years is Emilio Estefan. So I look at somebody like him, who is a bona fide global celebrity, right? And his wife, Gloria. And somehow, some way, he's been able to maintain a very humble disposition and a very genuine disposition. And I know how difficult that must be, because most people that I meet that are celebrities or that sort of thing aren't not like that. So he is definitely an outsider. They are genuine people that have maintained at their core who they are throughout their journey, and no matter what a success that they've had. I also, you learn different things from different people. So if I look at someone like Sol Trujillo, right, who was the very first U.S. born Latino to be the CEO of a Fortune 200 company, I would say that the one thing that has impressed me the most about him is that he has a very specific vision, and he is relentless in pursuit of that vision. He doesn't, like, nothing sets him back, nothing discourages him. He is relentless in pursuit of that, almost to the point of like I don't know how you do it. That's a quality that's really, really impressive. And then I look at somebody like Martin Cabrera, who is an investment banker out of Chicago, a Latino guy who grew up in the hood and is building a really terrific investment banking platform, commercial real estate developer, a number of different business units, who has also maintained his closeness to his community. So he has, achieved success. It hasn't changed him, but he's always kept one foot firmly where he came from, and always feels a sense of responsibility to lift people up along the way, which is a very, very, obviously positive attribute that a lot of people just don't have.
Yeah. To follow that question now, who has intimidated you the most? Anyone that, I mean, I know it's hard to intimidate you, but it has to be someone throughout these 30, 40 years that intimidated you at least a little bit.
No, that's very true. I mean, when I met George W. Bush, he was obviously, anytime you meet a president, it's a little bit shocking because you realize really how familiar you are with their mannerisms and with their voice and everything. And there they are right in front of you. And it's just hard to kind of break that surreal sort of moment. But Barack Obama was probably the most intimidating because this is the former leader of the free world who is also like still like on top of his game, so it's not like he's like on the downslope and he's just like just really nice. No, he's like still as sharp and as knowledgeable as he ever was. So you just kind of know that if you're going to be sitting there asking a question, especially if you're going to actually challenge a question or two, he's going to demolish you if you are not prepared. And that is very intimidating.
Yeah. And just for everyone to know, I mean, he interviewed Obama, Clinton, and Bush. And it seems that Obama might be the one that
He was the most
intimidate you a
intimidating,
little bit
I
more.
would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been, interviewed a few CEOs as well that are also formidable and, every bit as intellectually challenging. And so when you only have a few minutes with somebody, whether it's, backstage or on stage doing an interview, you only have a few moments to get your message across or to be able to make a connection with that individual. So there is an actual sort of skill involved in that. In fact, after I did the Obama interview, I did a couple of Zoom trainings with big companies on how I prepared for that interview. And I equated it to, not everybody's going to get a chance to, interview a president, but you're going to get a chance to speak to your CEO, maybe, for 5 minutes, or somebody of that stature. And there's a certain cadence and there's a certain language that you need to be fluent in to be able to distinguish yourself. Because when you're in a corporation, right, and that's a very competitive environment, and, picking the people who end up rising to the C suites and the highest level of those companies, I think it comes down to basically a handful of things. It's not just your productivity and what your skill is per se. It's like they start to look at, does this person know how to speak the language that is discussed and used in the C suites? Does this person understand the protocols around dealing with people at a very high level? So these are important skill sets for people to acquire if they're seriously looking to move up the ladder. And it's stuff that people don't talk about so much. They don't just promote the people who produce the most or sell the most. They hire the people that know how to convey a message in the way that they want it conveyed.
Yeah. You're giving great advice to everyone. Now, on a personal level, tell us, what does it look like a day for Gary Acosta from Monday to Sunday? What does it look like? At what time it starts or what time it ends?
So I've been getting up earlier these days, right? Because I never was an early riser, right? So that was one of the things that I thought, I must not be really that successful because every book I read says you have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You have to have this routine in the morning. You have to take a cold shower and stuff like that. Like I never did any of those things. So I thought I must be I must not be that successful. But lately, I've been getting up a little bit earlier because as you get older, you start to realize how important sleep is, and how important those things that we don't think about as much when we're growing up. So anyways, important in the morning that I do something active. So whether it's just walking to go get coffee at Starbucks or working, doing a Peloton for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I learned that really helps get my juices flowing a little bit. So I do something like that in the morning, or I try to every day. One of the things that I do that I think also is underrated, Miguel, is that we get so, especially in this Zoom era, we get so rigid in our schedules, and we're scheduling calls throughout the day and we're having meetings throughout the day, that if I have a day where I don't get at least an hour to do what I describe as deep thinking, I don't consider it a successful day.
Okay.
So I do a lot of the things that everybody has to do who runs companies or runs organizations, but I try to carve out an hour, sometimes 2 hours in a day, just to sort of think broadly and deeply on different problems we need to solve, or a new initiative that we're thinking about, or something of that nature. That sort of discipline in doing creative thinking, deep thinking, is an important part of my day. It served me well throughout, I think, my career. It's helped me prioritize and organize my thoughts better. So I highly recommend it to people. You got to find time to just think.
Wow, that's awesome. So we come into the last minutes. I want to ask you something a little bit more in a personal level. Most people know you're at a professional level, but the question I want to ask you is: imagine that you have a young 20-year-old Gary Acosta in front of you right now, with all of the experience and success that you have. What would you tell him?
So I probably would tell him to work fast, but don't rush, right? So that's an interesting discipline. John Wooden said something like that a long time ago. He was a head coach of UCLA and one of the most successful coaches of all time. He used to say, be quick, but don't rush, right? On the basketball court, which is a very interesting discipline. So we're in a very competitive world. So it's important that we move quickly and make quick, basically, decisions as we go along. But we don't want to force things. And patience, I think, is also an undervalued attribute, right? You have to be patient. So I would have told the 20-year-old Gary, it's like, be a little bit more patient, hard. Don't expect everything to come all at once. In fact, one of the things that I tell my kids is that you don't want to peak too soon either, right? You don't want the best years of your life to be in your mid 20s or even 30, right? To where the rest of your life you're like just kind of living off of that. You want to continue an upward trajectory over the course of your life. I think those are the happiest people who are always looking for new challenges and not necessarily peaking too early. So I know when you're young, you want everything now, but you will be
Yes.
well served to be a little bit patient with that and put off certain things for a period of time so that you can continue a positive journey throughout your life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great advice. As a mentor, and I'm sure that you have influence over, I mean, many, many people around you, directly or indirectly. And I know also that you have a beautiful family, beautiful wife, two kids, amazing kids, successful, a great example. With all that in mind, what has been, in your opinion, being that advice that you give to your closest friends, to your family, to your kids? What is that advice when it's about Hispanics, when it's about helping other people, when it's about what kind of advice would you give to someone that doesn't care much about others
Yeah.
other than themselves?
Well, there's a couple ways to sort of attack that. I have 3 kids and 2 grandchildren now, so the family is growing. But I would say, first of all, if you really want to learn something, teach it, right? So there is actually a benefit you get by sharing different sort of skills or different ideas or different sort of experiences. By sharing that with other people, it actually helps you organize those thoughts in your own mind. You get to understand the content even better when you're forced to communicate it and share it with somebody else. So there is an actual direct benefit that you get by mentoring other people and by sharing information with other people. The other thing I would say is that I know it sounds a little bit of a cliche, right? But I do think that everybody needs a purpose, right? It's not just enough to achieve success for the sake of success. I'm not one of those kind of touchy feely guys that says money doesn't matter or, the only thing that matters is the heart or whatever, right? The heart, and those things and family and having great relationships with the people in your family and with great friends is critical to, I think, anybody's mental health and happiness in general. But I do think that purpose is one of the fundamental things that we all need in our lives. So whether it's not giving back to your community or giving back to people who are less fortunate than you, having a purpose, like I'm not just working for the sake of, I actually have an objective. I'm actually trying to make the world a little bit better. And I believe that by this effort, I'm doing that. That to me provides people with everything. If you're doing well and you are actually contributing and you feel a sense of purpose, you're going to be very fulfilled in your career and you're going to be a better father, a better friend, a better spouse to the people who are closest to you.
Yeah. That's great advice. Gary, last question. In our industry, mortgage, real estate, and in all of these industries, at the end, as a leader, you have taught myself and also a lot of other people that you pray with example and you teach by example. I'm sorry. And you always recognizing the talent and helping in a lot of ways. What is it about Gary Acosta that drives you every single day, every single morning to wake up and do what you do? There has to be something out there that drives you and motivates you. Obviously, let's put family aside because I mean, we all know that family is always first. But what is that? What drives the passion that you have inside of you to help others? And lastly, what is your goal? What is your mission right now? I know it's always evolving, but right now at this time, what is your goal or mission, the ultimate goal that you have in the coming years?
Well, I mean, I think to answer your first question, I don't know who taught me this or where I learned it. My first of all, my grandfather was a great influence in my life. He was a pastor of a church and he was a really great leader in the community, and people look up to him throughout his life as somebody that was a mentor to them. And obviously that was something that I really admired about him. And of course, I wanted to incorporate some of that in my own life. I wasn't called for the ministry. That was not my calling, but I found another way to basically, I think, contribute and give back that, I think, was aligned with that sort of thinking or what he did. So that was always there. I mean, I've always thought that, if you work for other people, you will never have to worry about yourself, right? And I think that mindset has been really, I think it's done served me well, right? So I really do think about, when I think about NAHREP's mission or the activities we pursue, or whether or not we're doing some other initiative like the Hispanic Wealth Project or whatnot, I think if you take the approach of, and always challenge yourself, is how is this having an impact on people? Instead of like, how is the organization benefiting from this? How is it actually impacting the people that are engaging with us? Um, you know, Things just tend to work themselves out. If you create value, the money will come. And that's basically has been my mindset from the get go. So what's next? I think it's just continuing to expand on a lot of the things that we've done well at NAHREP. So I think that NAHREP now has set a model out there, established a model out there in terms of how to build an organization, platform, a network of especially business professionals that now can be replicated in other industries. As you know, we're now doing the National Hispanic Construction Alliance. And so we're bringing together a lot of Latinos that are in the construction industry as contractors, as tradesmen, as even developers. That is something that has been long overdue. We've got 1 million, 2 million Latinos employed in the construction industry. There's no organization that's represented them in a national way with any real sort of power. And then we're doing something with sports that's very similar. There's a lot of Latinos that have aspirations to be in the business of sports. It's a big business sector. And I think it's a very important vehicle in terms of improving the narrative, identifying role models, and really showing and showcasing Latinos in a really positive way. So I think it's a little bit more of that. I want to see those two initiatives sort of really mature and become formidable, and creating a bigger tent that I think takes some of the secret sauce that's worked at NAHREP and expands it to a broader network of people. I think it's good for Latinos, and I think what's good for Latinos is good for the country.
No, Gary, there's one thing for sure, based on what you just said. Either you moving forward and pushing yourself forward, or you're going backwards.
That's
Because
right.
because you are always pushing yourself with new initiatives, with something new, which is always amazing to see how you always into something new to help the community, to help professionals, and to help even new industries now, the construction. That's awesome. Gary, thanks so much for taking the time. I know that you are a very busy man. I appreciate being on the People's Show. And this is about leaders like yourself. And thank you for everything that you do to the industry as well.
Thank you, Miguel. Anything for you, bro.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And this is the People's Show. Today, we had a very special guest, and I hope that everyone enjoy as much as I did. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.